Well, welcome everyone to the start of season 3, our third season of C.A.R.s, Coffee and Christ, the weekly podcast with our team here at Automotive Royale, which is based out of Mounds, Oklahoma, or just outside the Tulsa Metroplex area. And as always, I am your host, Ross Turner. I am the corporate chaplain here at C.A.R., and excited to host our discussion this morning. And in today's episode, we're going to piggyback a little bit off of our 14th episode in season 2 on Christian entrepreneurship, where we talked about starting a Christian company, a work, secular marketplace company with Christian ministry values. We're going to piggyback on that and talk a little bit today about being a Christian as an employee. And this will be the first of maybe a series of discussions about faith at work. And we'll not do them back to back, but we'll definitely over the season employ a number of those discussions. This will be the first one today. So I thought it would be good for us to kind of think through, what does it mean to be a Christian at your job? And if you think about, how many hours there are in a week, I think over 190, and you think about how much you sleep, maybe 50 hours a week, and then you think about how much you are at home, probably about 50 hours a week, and then you think about how much you're at work. And I have 2 jobs, so I work about 65 hours a week. So I actually work more than I sleep. I work more than I'm at home, and I definitely work more than I'm at my job or at church. I'm at church maybe 3 hours a week, and I'm at my job 60-something hours a week. So I just think it's something to consider, that we're making more of our life at work than probably anything else we do, whether we like that or not. That's just the truth. So the impact that we're making the most, unfortunately, can be at our jobs, more than maybe other places we would love to make that impact, but it's something for us to think about. So thought we'd start today by asking just the lead-off question of, why is it so hard to integrate faith at your job? And why do Christians so struggle with this? In my experience, I'll start with my own experience. There's a lot of rules and regulations about it for sure to respect. But I think the main part is there's just this kind of, you kind of hope it'll happen at some point, or you just think that over time someone will pick up the notice that you're a Christian, and that's not also true. So it is a challenge, I think, for people to integrate. So why do you all think it is so hard to integrate faith and work? Who wants to jump into that this morning to start us off?
I think faith in the workplace, especially when it's not like a Christian-based environment like we have here at C.A.R., which is absolutely phenomenal. But, being in different workplaces that aren't faith-based, don't have Christian values, maybe they have some that correlate, but they're not directly embedded. Mm-hmm. Especially with my generation, I seem, is we don't like to be as bold as, the early church. And it's something that we definitely need to bring back. Yeah. Boldness and sustaining faith. Yeah. I think.
That's great, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, boldness being I think one of the key issues. Yeah. And certainly not just with your generation, but I think in general, but I can see what you're saying too, because there is a sense of kind of when everyone's kind of connected to one another, globalization. There's just this kind of, there's a different vibe to that in a generation. Yeah. Faith becomes a little bit almost too marketplace in that way. And then it becomes kind of watered down, right, in a sense. So that's really good. So yeah, boldness and sustainability. I think that's really great. Anyone else?
I would add, Josh. I would say kind of 3 things that came to mind. One of them is just our tendency as humans to compartmentalize. Yeah. I think men do this a lot. I got my car guys that I spend time with, and I do that over here. I've got my high school friends that I have this group and crowd. I've got my church friends that I put over here, and I've got my work friends. And you kind of compartmentalize, and because we oftentimes pose, we want to mirror that group. And so we change ourselves even group by group in that. And so the first is the tendency to compartmentalize. Well, that's what I do at church, and this is what I do at work. This is how the work is, and so I will just absorb that culture, which is not what we're called to do, right? We're meant to bring a culture from the kingdom into all these places, but we tend to compartmentalize. Yeah. The second one, I think, is, unfortunately, the love of money. So it is you can't serve God and mammon, but the fear of loss of like, what will this do and create in my job so that I will lose money or lose my lifestyle, or could it impact my promotion? It's this worship of mammon, right? So that worship, we wouldn't call that these days that, but it is. That's what it is. Anything you put above God in your decision-making criteria is worship. Yeah. And so that there is kind of like the second one. And then I think the last one you mentioned, which was persecution. Like, what are people going to say about me? You know, we grew up in a world where growing up is hard. You know, most people were bullied at some point in their life, whether it was a group or whether it was like maybe it was even just being left out of something, you know, like, but we go through life and we get hurt, and that creates these like barriers, these things that we don't want to get hurt. So we put up these barriers in how we communicate. I found myself in like new crowds where I don't know people, I almost can't speak in certain sense because I haven't yet assessed that crowd for what is safe. Yeah. You know, there's like a built-in subconscious limiter that's keeping me from saying certain things. And it's really because we really haven't been persecuted in the West. If you grew up in persecution, you would have gotten used to it, and you would have spoke boldly out of that. And you see that in church history. Mm-hmm. But when you grow up without persecution, you don't gain the boldness that you want. Mm-hmm. That you watch these movies and these things of these heroes that do that. But that came from a life of hardship. Right. That made them strong and bold and able to do that. And so it's kind of those three things. It's like fear, fear of persecution, fear of loss, worship of mammon, and our tendency to compartmentalize.
Yeah, that's great, Josh. Anyone else?
It does say, seek boldly the kingdom of God. The biggest thing that we have to get in our heads, That doesn't say seek safely. It doesn't say seek secretly. It doesn't say seek in your house, seek in your own time. It does, but not only. Not only, right. Seek boldly. That's in front of people. That's in front of places you don't know. That's everywhere.
That's really good, Chris. And I also think, just to mention that you bring that up again, is that I think probably Apostle Paul knew boldness, but that's what he prayed for. And actually, it's like he confronted everyone about, not in a mean way, but he confronted people with it. But then he asked at the end of Ephesians, pray for me for boldness. I think you're going to share some too.
Yeah. Another aspect that a lot of people may struggle with as well, and I know this is something that I struggle with, is people pleasing.
Oh yeah.
People pleasing, keeping the status quo, being a peacekeeper, not necessarily a peacemaker, not wanting to rock the boat and draw attention to yourself. That kind of goes along the same way. So if you are in an environment where, other people may not be believers, hey, I want to keep the peace. I don't want to disturb anybody. I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers, even though what they may be doing or saying ruffles yours. That's right. It's no, because their comfort, sometimes you put that above your own.
Yeah, for sure. So there's this sense of kind of blending in and kind of, hey, I don't want to upset these people, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is the Christian faith at times can be very upsetting. Mm-hmm. And if you're not reading the Bible correctly. It's very upsetting at times. To be called a sinner, not just other people, you. It's like, that's very hard for people to hear. That's hard for us to hear a lot of times, let alone like people have never heard that, right? So there's a lot of things that are upsetting about the Christian faith, in a world that promotes almost, complete inclusivity. Our core tenet is exclusivity. So it's going to create a lot of challenges to being a Christian in that kind of worldview. I think the only thing I would bring up in addition is just ignorance. I think there's a lot of Christians that just don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Like they don't know their faith well enough to know how to even discuss it most of the time. So I don't think it's always this kind of lack of something or whatever. I think sometimes there's just not enough there for them to know how to present it. So there is a lack of maybe education or formation or something there too, because they know kind of how to behave and kind of get along with people in a church environment, but they really don't know how to bring Jesus into their world very well, which I think is probably as equally difficult as boldness, probably. Well, I thought we'd do one more question here. Should Christians consider their job as part of their mission field? Do you think that's really how we should think about it? That's That's pretty, kind of radical to think about it in that way. Should we consider our jobs, our workplaces, our careers a mission field for our lives? And if so, why do you all think so? Again, I'm not saying we have to, but I'm saying, what do you all think, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Lord puts us in places and positions, with the plan that He has in our life, and every encounter that you have, should be considered part of your mission whenever you're, interacting with other people. That ties to, the boldness thing. Me being the introvert that I am, it's very difficult for me to be bold.
Absolutely.
So it's actually been quite the opposite for me. I've always looked at it as it's a mission for me. One of the first things that when I've gone into positions with companies, one of the first things that I've established pretty much everywhere that I've been is that I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
And it's in that mission, the either you're going to be led to or the Lord's going to lead someone to you in reference to that. And it's been kind of a difficult venture in some circumstances, because sometimes the boldness can sometimes be perceived worse than the tentativeness.
Yeah.
In some people's eyes, because when it's out there that's who you are and what you're about, it's kind of a double-edged sword in a lot of places, especially in a leadership role.
Oh yeah.
Because people will come to you with certain things, on a private level, and want to have discussions with you because they feel as if you may have a different view of the path that they should take or what's going on, or maybe a possible solution, through a Christian mindset that could help them.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side of that exact same thing, whenever you have to be the boss, then it's well, now you're supposed to be a Christian, and that creates a perception of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So there's a lot that needs to be dealt with within that mission. I can say that in the workplace, I have probably affected more people in my Christian life than I actually have at church by far.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right about that.
So,
That's normal.
I truly believe that, like I said, I think everywhere we go is our mission, and definitely the workplace, because you think about it, you touched on it, the amount of hours that are in a day, in a week, in a month, and in a year. Yeah. If you look at how much time you spend with the people in your workplace compared to how much you actually spend of your wake time during the course of a day with your family on a regular basis, that's one thing that I think that I've really enjoyed about the mission that the Lord has put me on, specifically in the workplace. And one of them that really stands out for me is there was a gentleman, he passed away a couple of years ago, his name's Mitch. And I really believe that, obviously the Lord knew, because the Lord knows everything. So, he knew the path that Mitch was going to be going down soon. And I think he put me in and it gave me an opportunity to develop a relationship with him. Well, Mitch was an enforcer for a motorcycle club, a one percenter. So he lived a very, very radical, very extreme, very, a lot sometimes on the illegal side of life for a very long time. Yeah. And, he's a big dude, rough guy. A lot of people didn't want to approach him because he was kind of gruff and things like that. But, it was one of those things as well. The Lord, I just kept feeling the Lord, pushing me to have a conversation with Mitch and find out. I could just tell there was something wasn't right. His marriage was falling apart. Financially, he was having troubles and things. And we just talked and talked and talked. And then finally I invited him to church. He came to church. Got baptized, and then found out that he had cancer in one of his eyes. And within about 9 months, he passed away. Yeah. So, that right there is a perfect example of what your mission in the workplace is, because there are just so many different so many different things that are going on in so many different people's lives that the Lord opens that door for you to develop a relationship and bring them to Him.
Well, I think we are also in a different climate now than we have been before when it comes to being a Christian. And Chris, you may see this because you are in a younger generation. Whereas 5-10 years ago, if you would enter in the workplace and say, I'm a Christian, the first thought would probably be, oh, goody two shoes. I'm not going to invite this person to happy hour. Yeah. But they've got a certain preconceived notion of what that means if you verbally just say, I'm a Christian.
You're almost an outcast.
Right. Yeah. Versus now, you may, if you say, oh, I'm a Christian, instead of being viewed as, oh, that's the prude, that's the goody two shoes, you're thought of, oh, that person's hateful. That person is the bigot, right? And so because our culture has shifted in what they view what a Christian is, then I think approaching it differently now than we may have 5-10 years ago, where before it would be, you could say, hey, I'm a Christian, they view this thing, they see your actions, versus now you may approach it where it is, okay, I've got to lead with my actions first. Yep. I'm going to lead with my actions, lead with shining that light. And then when they find out, oh, I'm a Christian, oh, that's why there's something different. And you can shift someone's opinion on what a Christian is because they see the reality of what a true believer walks out in life.
I thought a lot about this. Is it used to be that criminals were essentially underground, and the whole process was about them being underground, and they would use certain, they would use the dark web, they'd use crypto, they would use all this stuff, and now the culture has become the criminal. And you're seeing that throughout the world, and wickedness is what's trying to be pervasive in the world. And now the church is starting to feel underground in a way. And in an underground church, if you look at China, there is, in the scriptures, it says, do be wise as serpents. And serpents are the enemy. So understand strategies. And one of the things that it's not, I don't want to blanketly condemn people who are in a workplace doing things that are of the kingdom and infiltrating the kingdom intelligently and strategically. Right. Because if they were to expose themselves, if they were just to walk into the royal court in China and say, oh, I'm a Christian, that would not be smart for the plan the Lord has for their life. Right, that would it'd be bold, but often foolish at the same time. There is a method by which to go in and infiltrate through principles first, then difference in love and character, then having a noticeable difference, and then having pointed conversations one-on-one to recruit. You have to keep things underground to keep the movement alive and to protect the church. And we've moved into an era where that is true. And so there's two sides of this, right? It's don't hide your faith, be bold, right? When Jesus was in front of the Pharisees, he did not cower because it was his choice, and he was allowing them to do it. Yeah. Right? But at the same time, the Father chose very strategically where to put Jesus, so that the time did not come too soon, right? Because it was not yet his time. Yeah. And so there was this, you see the Lord work very strategically throughout Scripture, but when he did speak to a crowd, he knew his Father would take care of them, right? So it's just balance, I think, of in the world we live in, they're not ready to hear what it is until they are. And you shift that moment and create that. And I've done that time and time again with individuals, one-on-one, as you can, but I feel like I've been behind enemy lines for years, and understanding that world versus I work in a supermarket and everyone has kind of diverse backgrounds is, very different environments. It depends on how hostile of an environment are you in. And then you can you're just gonna have to use different levels of strategy. And those strategies do come from the Lord. I used to say, you don't have to be good at anything if you can hear from God. You literally just walk over this way. You have no skills. You're great with God. And I think that is, in these different places, depending on where you are. If you are in a foreign country where people are killed for your faith, you have to be smart about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how you're growing the church. But the Lord will grow that church, right? And but at the same time, don't put your light under a basket, right?
Because it's balancing those things, like y'all are saying, and it's using wisdom, as you're saying. I think that like all of you are bringing up, there's a lot kind of that y'all are talking about, but I think there's a sense of Christianity is not the majority anymore. And I think for a lot of Christians that they react to that by getting angrier, by getting more forceful, by looking like medieval Christianity, a hostile takeover.
Yeah.
It's like it's not something to imitate, right? So there's a sense of like how are we reacting to that. Persecution is part of the Christian life, and I think for a lot of Christians they don't think it is. They think the reality is that they should feel happy and should be blessed and all these things. No, the Christian life is going to be persecuted. It's part of the Christian life. So it's how you react to that demonstrates your Christianity. And part of that is inviting it into your life, whether it's trying to live above reproach or sharing at the right times or just sharing publicly or whatever it is. You're going to invite that into your life because you're living in a world that's not, in a sense, yet all of God's kingdom, though it is. So there's this kind of thing that you're going to have to learn how to deal with pushback. And instead of pushing back harder or being mean, you endure it. And in some ways, you try to live above it in love as best you can. To overcome evil with love is what Romans 13 says. So it's important to remember, like, getting the pushback is part of being a Christian. We talk about that, later on in the discussion, a little bit more of exactly how to respond to that. But just kind of remember, like, if that's happening in your life and you're listening, like, that's part of being a Christian. And in the West, it was mainly just a war of ideas. Now it's a war of everything. And you just have to kind of remember that. It's not going to be easy to be a believer. So I think part of it is you're a dual citizen. You're going to be living in this world. A lot of it's in your work and your job. And a lot of it is going to have to be like, when do I show that I'm an ambassador for Jesus? There is a point I have to say I am a believer, right? Though we want to be wise about how we do that, not just foolish and invite, targets on our back constantly or whatever. So there's a balance there. But like you all were saying, character really counts ultimately the most, because you can say all you want, and if you don't back it up, it doesn't matter at all, right? So it just invites hypocrisy. So I think this is what Paul says about ultimately like how we should work, and then I want to get your thoughts about it. He says this in Ephesians 6, "Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart, rendering service with a good will, as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord." So this is very clear instructions, right? So how should we, as employees and employers, as Christians, how should we go about working? I mean, what are some qualities that Paul is saying has to be a part of every Christian's life at their job?
Well, I've had that challenge quite a bit, being in the automotive industry and then the manufacturing industry. It is absolutely it's absolutely a challenge where when I won't say everyone, but the majority of everyone around you is living a completely different lifestyle than what you are. When people are first getting to know you, you see people kind of side-eyeing you. Okay, they're just kind of like, okay, well, we're over here talking about sexual things or drunkard things or parties, and we're talking about this, we're talking about that. Well, this guy isn't participating in our conversation. What's going on here? Is he an antisocial? Is he? And then once they get to know you, they realize, like, for example, for me, I'm definitely not an antisocial. I'm not an introvert. I'm a guy that will typically talk on most any subject if it's not something that's morally, ethically, or goes against my character. I have something to say. We all know that. So when that participation doesn't take place, people are like, okay, what's up with this guy? Why this? Why that? And then once they start to question, they're like, okay, hey, what's going on with, hey, blah, 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 I'm a Christian. I don't talk about the same things that you guys talk about. No offense. You live your life the way that you want. That's your choice. I choose to live my life the way that, this way, I choose to follow the Lord. As you move through that, people start to notice that your character is different. But what it also does, it kind of puts a spotlight on you, which we're supposed to have on us. Yeah. And I can remember a circumstance, it's kind of a funny story. I was working with a couple guys. We're working with some stuff, and I was carrying some things, and one of them fell, and I went to pick it up, and I ended up dropping all of them, and I said, "Oh crap!" But I used the other word.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at me, and they're like, and looked back at each other. He's like, "Ray just cussed," and I was like, and I thought to myself, it actually feels good to get called out for being that guy. As Christians, we have to make sure that we, like I said, with character and things like that, we have to make sure that we don't allow the workplace to influence that.
And it's challenging. Like you're saying, Ray, it's difficult. I think, most unbelievers look at Christians as just kind of elevated moralists. All we are is just people that do more, goodness or something. They have no real clue about what Christianity is about. But that's part of it. That's a little piece of it, right? And we're not perfect people. No one's promoting that.
Right.
No one's promoting Christians are perfect. I don't know why they think that, but they need to understand, no, we're promoting someone else who's perfect. Yeah. So it's I think it's an opportunity to realize, I'm a real terrible sinner. Actually, I know my sin probably better than you do. That's part of being a Christian. But I also know the one who can save me. So there's a sense of we're not trying to put on a show for people morally. We're trying to show who Jesus is by growing in him. And so there's opportunity to fail there with respect to, I think, accountability, but there's opportunity to fail there. We're not looking for perfection. Right.
Yeah. So kind of like what you're saying is, I think it's been helpful for me more recently to think of myself as a citizen of a different country all of a sudden. Yeah. And that is a true utopia. Heaven is a utopia because God is there. Mm-hmm. It is a utopia because he is love. And it's what everyone searches for. Yeah. And if you don't understand that, that's the foundation of it. And I mean, there's examples of him doing that, which paying for our sins, coming and dying, all that. But the ultimate crux is our dad is good, and he has a kingdom. He has a country far away, and that place is available. And we're recruiting for that place. That's right. And I want to tell you, in our dystopian world we're currently living in, right, where we are promised an American dream, but we're given debt and poverty. We are promised, a way out, but we're held down by the rich. Yeah. There's a better way. There's a freedom. There's a freedom from money, or there's a freedom from tyranny, or there's a freedom from those leaders. That king is not the ultimate say in the universe. Let me tell you about that. But a lot of times we get stuck in religiosity, and so many people have heard the same things in church over and over and over. It becomes drone noise to them to hear. So I feel like sometimes we need to, in our own hearts and in our own ways, in our own lives, tell our testimony as a new parable to the kingdom. That's great, Josh. What did God do in my life that has changed and created a place where you're at peace and they're crying at night, right? That deep, dark feeling you feel inside, there's a way. There's a way, and it's a place out, and it's not actually, it's a person. And let me tell you about that. And let me tell you about my best friend. That's right. But, unless you can anchor to that being real in your own life, you can't speak from experience. So if you haven't sat with Jesus and talked to him, which is available to you, then you don't know and have any backing to that, to believe enough to say and have that faith. And so, at the center of it, Jesus is just saying, hey, doors are open to the utopia of the universe. Do you want to come? That's it. And I do want to say, because if I leave you where you're at, it is a dystopia that ends in hell because of the natural trajectory of entropy. Yeah. It's the entropy and move into chaos that happens in people's life without God. And I have a way to bring you back to order. Yeah. And not just order, but love, fulfillment, and a forever life. Yeah. It is a true utopia. A lot of movies will say every utopia is a dystopia. No, that's just because everything else is a dystopia. That's correct. Right? And so that's why they all end in the story, because that is true. But what is also true is there is a utopia, and it is the kingdom. And so, but thinking about it in religious terms, or how do I get this person saved, and they're all very unhelpful, I think. and actually centering yourself on a true reality, and then going into the world and helping spread that reality, or take ground, or move into a new industry, like we're moving into the automotive industry. It is a taking of ground. We are declaring war on that culture, and we're saying, no, there is a better way, and there is more beautiful things that we can do, more creative things that we can do, and we will show the world that. And that is the kingdom mindset. And it's not, it is one of love, and you do it by different rules. We play by different rules in this kingdom, but I think that has helped me, how I'm thinking about it, whether you're infiltrating first as a spy, then as an invasion, or you're doing it as a just straight movement in with the flag planted. Whatever the Lord has called you to do, just go do it, and don't be afraid, because the greater are those that are with us than are with them.
Well, I love how, I think what you're saying there, Josh, is you're showing that Christianity is not a moral. Okay, right. It's showing that Christianity is a story that's true.
It's true.
And I think that's the difference for a lot of Christians. They don't actually know that. They're thinking that Christianity at best is an argument. And it's more than that too. It's a story that's true. It's a kingdom that's real. Yeah. And if you are in it, you're a citizen of it. Therefore, you're an ambassador in this dystopia.
Yeah.
You've got to understand that, or you don't know how to live above this stuff.
Yeah.
You do. And then you also have to know it personally, or you can't share it well. It's just kind of like, hey, like this is this weird dance I'm learning at church. Well, it's like that's what a lot of Christians think, like, unfortunately, because they don't know anything more than that. And so if they'll know the story, they know who they are in that story, and then how to share that story, suddenly their work becomes a wonderful opportunity to do all that. But I think most Christians don't know how to engage those things well. And like you're saying, the citizenship understanding of identity is so crucial to knowing how to live in this other world, because that's really what we have to think like. It is a dystopia. That's why everyone loves dystopias, because it captures their reality the most here. Mm-hmm. And the Christian is saying there's something more and better, totally different world that we actually believe has invaded this world already through Jesus Christ and the church. And we're actually citizens of that. So I think part of being ambassadors is the good works that we have, the way that we share, but we've got to share a consistent story of a better world, or people just don't think anything more about us than just kind of being guilt-laden jerks most of the time.
You know what it's kind of like? It's like if you thought of an army, and then they get separated from their leader, the general, and they get isolated off to their own. I mean, all kinds of ideas and awfulness might come from that, or like a feeling of lost, a feeling of confusion, a feeling of uncertainty. And I would describe that as the church right now. Yes. Because what has happened is there was a moment, probably in every denomination, where true connection to God happened. If you go back to church history at the beginning of every denomination, there was a true moment where God moved in a group of people. And then all that was left over the years, when the connection was lost to the general, or that same moment, that same fire didn't carry through. And then all they have is the stories. Right. All they have is the old commands. All they have is the old orders. And that is where we start to get into pharisaical thinking, is because we have isolated ourselves from the body. Yeah. And what we're meant to do is just constantly go back to our general and get fresh orders all the time. But as the enemy will take and cut off that line over and over again and isolate little groups of us. Yeah. And that's why church seems so confusing. So if you're a new believer and you walk into a church and you hear all these things that we do, we do it this way, and this is how we worship, and we do this thing, it's because they're mimicking a past of where that happened. But there's just a need for continual refreshing from the Lord. You need to live on the daily, this is my day, my daily bread. Give it to me, Lord, now. Right? And I think that's part of why it's so hard to know, like, what do I do here? Like, this confusion, all the churchyisms and stuff like that. And then what do I do with that in the world? And all that confusion, there's no orders there. There's no clear mission in people's hearts because they're disoriented.
Well, I think what you're saying again is there needs to be this kind of, I think for Christians what's really hard for all of us is that we kind of finally get the dance routine down at church, finally. And then we don't know what to do with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was talking to a family member one time, and he's been to all the Bible studies and done the memory verses and all the things he's supposed to do. And he described himself as the smartest dumb Christian he's ever seen. What he's trying to say there is that he knows answers. He doesn't know how to live it out. He doesn't know how to be wise. He doesn't know how to be accessible to unbelievers. Yeah, because that takes more than tradition. It takes a walk with God.
Yeah.
See, and so you've got to learn the difference there. There's nothing wrong with tradition. There's healthy traditions, like you're saying, Josh. Like the Spirit uses order in our lives. There is important there. But when that's all there is, and you're just dancing to song lyrics that you forget what it's about. You don't know what you're connecting to. And I think, again, there's this sense of you've got to understand how to be flexible, opportunistic as a Christian. You've got to learn to be in the world, not of it, in a way that's like, I'm bringing life to somebody, not some kind of religiosity to somebody. So it's challenging stuff, I think. But when we do it with consistent ethics and we do it with a consistent message and a good story, it seems over time to make the impact we want. Well, I'll finish with this. We all talked a little bit about persecution. I thought this would be good to finish on, because I do think if we're actually living out the message, it's just going to happen over and over and over again. It just happens. And so we have to not ever be surprised by that. This will happen more in churches sometimes than anywhere else. Because when you're trying to live out the message with other religious people that would prefer the status quo, notice Jesus, this is exactly what happens. He was the most persecuted of all, to the point of death on the cross. So again, by religious people. In fact, conservative religious people called the Pharisees. So this is what he says. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad. Your reward is great in heaven. So they also persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, everyone loves to say, wow, there's a prophet, or look at that prophet, how cool the prophet. It's not cool to be a prophet. It's terrifying to be a prophet. People look at someone on the stage, the pastor, look how fun of a job he has. It is not a fun job. So the reality is there's tons of pushback if you want to live for God in a public way. So while we are pursuing righteousness, to some level, we're going to get pushed back at work. So how can we encourage one another, to finish, and other people listening, when they face adversity, when they are persecuted to different levels, even losing their jobs? How can we encourage them to live out the Christian life in their work? What would you all say to encourage?
Well, I think, a lot of times people take like we said, the Bible says, to go boldly. If we take the approach that we're going to be timid about our Christian life, then the enemy, they're going to come boldly as well. So, and what I have found is that sometimes when people find out or have found out that I was a Christian, there is an immediate challenge. Mm-hmm. It is okay, and it's similar to the mindset that Abby had mentioned, previously with old Christians, is that whenever someone hears you're a Christian, well, you're a goody two shoes, you do nothing wrong, you're perfect kind of thing. And one of them was, well, you're a Christian, right? And I was like, yeah. And it said, do you ever speed coming to work? I'm like, yeah. Well, doesn't the Bible say obey man's law? Yeah. Well, then that means this morning, whenever you're coming into work, you sinned. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you read that?
I sin every day.
Yeah.
It's worse than that. I promise.
I sin every day. I mean, it's a constant renewal every day. It's a constant relearning every day. When someone approaches you with something like that, don't take that situation or yourself so seriously that it becomes uncomfortable. Because I've come to the point where I kind of welcome the challenge. Yeah. If you're going to come challenge me, that means that we're going to have a conversation. Right. And guess what we're going to have a conversation about?
I think that as you think about what Jesus said there, what he was calling everyone to is to think about it in a higher reality. So you've got Jesus now sitting next to the Father, and every time we stand there and he says, you see that? Ray got got challenged by that individual, and he's held firm. All right, now write that down, Angel 5, aisle 3. Write that down. Write that down, because we won't forget that in the time to come.
That's right.
Yeah. Because Jesus is calling us to think about things in the higher reality, and so were the early church leaders, where they said, consider it all joy, my brother, that you would come through trials of many times. And the way they say the reward was character. Right. Well, character is the only thing you can bring with you to heaven.
That's right.
So character transfers from earth, but where moth and rust don't get you.
That's right.
So I can bank on that character that I'm gaining here, which is actually, so what is he doing? He's calling us to true value in that, and take joy in understanding what true value is. If earth in this life is like a dream in comparison to heaven, which it will feel like once you're there, you will not even worry about the things you said. It would be, it pales in comparison, it says in the word, like to the joys the Lord has for you. And so it just seems like it's all worth it. And that's hard to believe while you're in it, but unless you lift your mind to what Jesus is saying, to a perspective that is more true than what you're experiencing. And that is what he's calling us into. He's actually calling, well, how can you understand spiritual things?
Yeah.
If I tell you earthly things and you can't understand. He's calling us into a higher level of thinking over and over and over again. So that when we hit that, we're like, oh yes, this must mean promotion.
That's right.
This must mean 2 cities instead of 1. Whatever the reward the Lord has for you in heaven. And it's not even just material things, or the proximity. I think this is the greatest joy, the proximity to the kingdom and the Father.
Yeah.
David said, it's better that I be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord. Like that is David was honing in on the actual joy of eternity. Right. And that's my goal, is how many steps away from the throne can I be? Yeah. And what does that take in this life? And that is persecution. Well, Jesus did a perfect job, and he's right next to the Father.
I think you hit it right on the head. I think what you said there was, you have to understand it's worth it. I think that's the mindset that you've got to understand. I think if you're thinking about this life, it doesn't seem worth it, because you're suffering in this life. Maybe you lose your job. Maybe people think less of you. Maybe your family cuts you out. Maybe all those things happen to you. The reality is, if you're thinking about it in this life's perspective, that's terrible. But if you're thinking about it in the next world, it's worth it. If it was done for the Lord Jesus, it's worth it, because his kingdom lasts forever. So there's a sense of making sure that you understand, what are you doing this for? Are you doing it to kind of build your bank account? Or are you doing it to really understand, I'm investing. When you invest, it hurts, doesn't it? Yeah. It hurts. It hurts to tithe when you don't have a whole lot of money. It hurts. But when you understand what it's in, and that it's going to accumulate, then all of a sudden you say, hey, that's worth it. That's what he's saying here. Jesus is saying the prophets, most of them died because of the faith, but they counted it joy. So there's a sense where the persecution is, in a way, Bonhoeffer said it, one of the famous Christians of the 20th century. He said, the greater persecution, the greater grace. So it's not as if God says, I'm going to give you this persecution, have at it. No, he actually provides a greater sense of support to you in that persecution, even to the point of martyrdom. He says it's the greatest grace, which is the very paradoxical way of thinking, because we're thinking of this life, we need to kind of hold on to this life. No. You're going to give up this life for the next one. It's like actually even greater grace, because it's entering into greater joy.
And a good question to ask is, how much grace do you need?
Yeah.
I need a lot of grace.
Yeah.
I need a lot of grace.
Yeah.
And I think that okay, whatever it takes, Lord. I mean, if you really are self-aware of what your life needs in grace, if you were to sit on that judge, and sit there, and at the final days, you would seek after much grace.
That's right, and it's what you'd want. Well, I hope this has been encouragement. It's certainly an encouragement to me. I hope it's an encouragement to you all and everyone who's listened today. And this will be the first of several conversations about kind of just practical Christianity in a work environment. And that's what we're trying to do ourselves and grow ourselves as a Christian company, but also to bless and encourage others who might not be in that environment too. So again, we always close with just encouraging you to go to our website, crossautomotiveroyale.com. There you can find ways to connect with our company when it comes to business, restoration of vehicles, when it comes to flipping vehicles, when it comes to building vehicles. Also ministry opportunities. We have a car donation program. We have a car clinic here. And just general ministry in the community. We're about those things. So go to that website to find out how you can connect with us. So grateful for all you joining me this morning. What a fantastic, encouraging discussion. Hope it's been an encouragement to you too. Until next time, sign off.